Hello, everyone. Welcome to our conversation series. My name is Yuejia, and I'm the founder and managing director of Hub101.Earth, a global open access platform spreading the word on climate, nature, and people positive solutions. Today, we're actually recording this very special conversation from the UNFCCC COP30 site in Belém, which is situated along the coast of the Brazilian Amazon rainforest. Our very special guest today is Silas Siakor, and the Executive Director of Integrated Development and Learning, Liberia, who is a key strategic knowledge partner to Hub101.Earth. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And it's such a wonderful thing to run into familiar faces, old and new, at COP. And it is really wonderful we get to, spend some time together and have a chat this morning. We were delighted when IDL Liberia became a partner to Hub101.Earth earlier this year. And I was wondering whether you can just tell us a bit about your work at IDL Liberia. What are the sort of problems that you're seeing in country, and what are the sort of solutions that you're exploring from your perspective?
Well, Integrated Development and Learning is a fairly new organization, but I've worked in the natural resource sector for more than 2 decades now. And over the years, we have seen some very important changes in our laws. For example, local communities now own more than two-thirds of the forest in Liberia. That puts them in charge of very important natural resources. However, they are among the most impoverished segment of the population. These are some of the poorest people on the planet, yet they are endowed with very vast and very important natural resources. So all we are trying to do is work with them to strengthen their ability to better manage those resources for their own development, but also for the betterment of humanity.
So tell us a bit more about the natural resource that you're talking about, the forests in Liberia, because I think, I myself wasn't very aware of the how much forest you have and what sort of biodiversity and do you host.
Liberia is a very small country tucked on the west coast of Africa, bordered by Sierra Leone, Cote d'Ivoire, and Guinea. The country, despite its size, holds a little over 50% of the remaining Upper Guinea rainforest. And this is a very biologically diverse region, very significant in terms of biodiversity conservation. It is actually recognized as a global biodiversity hotspot. So that makes it really important. Some people will even refer to it as the lungs of West Africa. So this is a very important ecoregion, and our effort is basically to work with communities that are situated in these forests, that live and depend on these forests, to be able to manage it better. They have been managing it, to be fair, they have been managing it reasonably okay over the last couple of years. However, there's a lot of external pressure, changes in the national context that are putting them under a lot of pressure. And therefore, we are working with them in the context of the pressure that they are having to deal with, both from climate change, both from economic actors outside of their communities, to be able to withstand those pressure and to better manage the resources that they have.
So when you talk about the communities, are they communities they own their land on a small scale? So is it the fact that they have some forests, some on their land, and they're thinking about how to conserve them, as opposed to what are the opposing forces that they're facing?
So these communities, most of them, the ones that we work with, sometimes 70, 80% are forested. So they virtually live in the forest as consider that. However, that puts them at a lot of disadvantage. Logging companies on the one hand would like to access the valuable timber species they have. Mining companies are knocking on their doors every day. They would like to mine in their areas. And of course, there are other development actors, oil palm developers that will also like to access these same areas. So they are caught in between all of these different forces trying to access their land, but also to access their forest. And all we are trying to do is to work with them in a way that they can withstand all of that pressure, but also to be able to turn the natural assets that they have into economic opportunities for themselves and also for the children. And conservation plays into that because they would like to to keep some of those resources around them for the benefit of generations above. So they are not very interested in the good things, in the consumerist behavior, uh, basically wanting more and more of all the things that modernity has to offer. All they would like is to have the most basic needs, to be able to address those basic needs: education, safe drinking water, healthcare for their community. That's all they need. And if we can work with them to make sure that they are able to address those basic needs, that's what we are setting ourselves up to do.
That's absolutely amazing. How much would you say their rights or their land ownership rights come to play into the picture for these communities?
Their rights to the land is, I would say, the foundation on which all of our intervention is built. And this is a fairly a new phenomenon in the Liberia context, in that we changed our law just 6 years ago in 2018, when the government and stakeholders finally realized that communities that live in the forest are in a better position to work with the government, to work with other stakeholders to better manage those resources. But the starting point will be recognizing and protecting their rights to their customary land. So the law as it is now recognizes, formally protects, both in legal sense, the land rights of these communities. And just by enacting that legislation, more than 60% of the land across the country is now owned by communities. They are in charge, they have decision making over that. So they are in a very unique position to help the country, to help humanity, to really better manage and protect those resources. So in that context, it is now our responsibility, the rest of humanity's responsibility, to work with them to be able to address other basic needs that they have. And this is just because they depend on the resources around them, they depend on the forest. They need to have other alternative sources of livelihood so that they are able to balance the use of the resources around them. Because if their entire livelihood is allowed to depend solely on the forest, that would drive, for example, deforestation, because these are very agrarian communities. So we have to find other ways to work with them to see other pathways for economic development, rather than depending 100% on the forest around there.
Yeah, absolutely. Give them a real alternative to live with forests on their land and to be able to send their kids to school and have access to Medicare, etc. Right?
And that's why our intervention, sometimes people find it easier if they describe it in the context of, we give them some money and they keep the tree standing. But it actually goes beyond that. It is about working with them, putting some resources in their hands so they decide what the development priorities are. But at the same time, we realize that we have to accompany that with other interventions. For example, on agriculture, so that they adopt more sustainable practices in how they engage in agriculture. Also, investment in water and sanitation, for example. These are areas where they don't have safe drinking water mostly. So just having the borehole fitting that with an after-death hand pump so that people have clean drinking water for domestic use and for drinking, that makes a lot of difference for them. So these are people that we would like to work with to help them access the most basic of necessities that they need to have a thriving community, but also to be able to better manage the resources around.
Now, I know you're a very humble person, but I really want to bring up the fact that you are the recipient of the 2006 Goldman Environmental Prize, which is a very prestigious prize awarded to grassroots environmental activists. So I want to go back to sort of the beginning of your career and those earlier days. Can you tell us about how you got into this and what led you up to that environmental prize in 2006?
Well, if I'm to be honest, I will say I grew up in a situation that this was my natural destiny. In that I grew up in the countryside. I grew up just behind my house when I was growing up. We were living literally in the forest. And I saw all of this growing up, and I know what it meant to us because as children, as boys, we will go out to hunt, we will go out to swim in the rivers, etc., etc. And we did really enjoy nature when I was growing up. And then they fast forward 2 decades, 3 decades later, and all of that is beginning to disappear around us. But what really attracted me to the natural resource sector, to the forestry sector, was the fact that corruption was also at play at the time that I got involved. We had a civil crisis at the time. This was 1990 up to 19, early 2000, 2001 and 2. We had a situation in which the warlords were literally harvesting timber, selling that, and using the proceeds to buy guns in order to kill the people who own and live in these forest areas. And having to live in that situation, having to deal with that situation, I got involved trying to just get the word out there to international organizations that were working on these issues. And we were fortunate to establish really good relationships. And so we began to really provide the first-hand information from the ground that they needed in order to lobby at the international level. However, what we realized very early on was that uh, there was always the constant question about the veracity of the information that they were putting out there. And that kind of forced our heads to kind of have to come out to say, well, we live here, we are experiencing these situations, and this is our reality. And the world has to step in to do something about it. So as a result of all of that, when the UN stepped in, imposed sanctions on Liberia timber, fortunately, that ended, that led to an immediate end to the Civil War. And we were able to begin to rebuild our lives moving forward.
What year was that? Sorry.
This was 2003 with the UNFCCC sessions. And in 2006, I received the Goldman Prize. And that really helped us to elevate the issues that we have been talking about. We were able to engage with the government at the time to launch a series of reforms in the forestry sector. So the laws were being changed, the regulations were being changed, the policy framework was being looked at. And now we have a very progressive policy and legal framework that we are working with. So I can proudly say that Liberia has one of the most progressive legislation on land or forest in the entire Africa region. And that gives us the foundation on which we are building our interventions at this point.
Yeah, it's incredible how the solution actually takes everyone on board: policymakers, private sector, communities, and you're kind of playing a central role in bringing all those actors together. And in terms of, you're in a fairly unique position. I'd love to just ask my one last question of what would you like to see more of? Like what would help the situation on the ground in Liberia from your perspective and the community's perspective and the forest perspective?
We have, all of them are actually tied together. We are in a situation in which the world needs the forest around these communities. We need the forest in order to help stabilize some of the effects, experience of climate change. And the communities need inward investment in order to address some of the basic needs that they have. So it's a win-win situation for us. So what we need now is for the world to pay a little bit more attention. For example, make climate finance much more accessible to these communities. Remove some of the bureaucracy that's being built around climate finance in many different spaces so that communities are able to access. And these people are not asking for millions and millions of dollars. They are asking for the most basic investment that we can make to help them to at least meet the challenges, the economic challenges, the social challenges they have to deal with today in order for them to contribute to the global effort to combat the effects of climate change.
Well, the forests are a huge part of, well, not just climate solution, but all the nature-based solutions and all the positive movements towards nature biodiversity and conservation that we just need so much. And we're reminded of that at this COP because it's sort of dubbed both the Indigenous and Nature COP because we're in the middle of the Amazon forest. And so the importance of all of these natural hotspots is very much at the fore. So well, thank you so much for joining us today, Silas. I always learn so much from you every time we talk, and you remain a true inspiration But yeah, we are so glad that IDL Liberia is a partner, and we really look forward to many, many future conversations and collaborations going forward.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.